whatever the date this is, November 19th, council work session. And I know that Claire is running a little late. Alan always has trouble making this transition, so they'll show up soon. But I think we can proceed with the first item on the agenda, Sustainability Commission.
Take it whenever you're ready.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here tonight. I'm here, my name is Chelsea Clinton. I'm the Sustainability Manager for the City of Eugene. I'm here with Howard Saxon, who's a member of the Sustainability Commission and a past chair. The chair, Kelsey Lavore, and the vice chair, Sue Willing, both couldn't make it tonight because they had work commitments, but Howard, I'm sure, will do a great job filling in. I'll just give a few summary remarks and then I'll pass it over to Howard. So I've been with the Sustainability Commission for about a year and a half now, and since I began, their mantra has been, how can we be a trusted advisor to City Council? And I think over the past year and a half, they've done a great job making strides towards, I think they've probably always been a trusted advisor, but improving that relationship. This has been embodied through some of the work they did about a year ago, where they created working agreements that streamlined their process and made it really clear how they can move an idea to a proposal that the commission approves and move that forward to you all. And this past year, you could see that progress in that they sent you 9 proposals. It's pretty impressive. Been doing a lot of work. And the quality of those proposals, I think, is evident. They all contain a clear ask or a request from you, a summary of the issue, and a triple bottom line analysis in a pretty concise format. And I really appreciate all the effort they put into that. Then Howard's going to provide a review of the annual report, their work plan for the next year, and present you with a new recommendation and go over some other accomplishments. So I'll hand it over to him at this point and let him summarize that.
Okay. Good evening, and thanks for having us. I know it's been hard to get a lot of topics on a work session. I think there's quite a queue, so appreciate providing us the opportunity this evening. I wanted to go over a little bit of what we did last year. It was a very busy year for us, and I think we accomplished a lot. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that at our commission hearings, I think we met 11 times last year. We've had, on average, 10 to 20 people, members of the public, attend our commission meetings. Matter of fact, our room in the atrium building is sometimes going out, people going out the door. And so there's been a lot of interest in our work, and I think our commission has provided another avenue for people to get engaged with what the city's doing, what the commission's doing. And we've had people talk about banking, divestment, the climate action plan, the whole crisis on plastics recycling, and especially wildlife feeding. That got a lot of interest, both at our commission and I know at the council meeting. But nevertheless, it's been good to hear from the public, and kind of helps ground us too on what we're doing. As Chelsea mentioned, we did send 9 proposals last year. Electric vehicle ready homes, tiny and small homes, the home energy scoring requirement, a joint letter with the Human Rights Commission in support of the Declaration of Human Rights and Climate Change, code modifications to allow places of worship to provide transitional housing for homeless families, the eWeb riverfront property, the Northwest Natural Gas franchise agreement, which you just had a work session on, which we were very appreciative of, a resolution honoring our children's trust, and recommendations on the wildlife ordinance. One of the things that we did last year, this past year, was collaborate with city staff on the climate recovery ordinance and the banking RFP. I served as chair of a committee that helped staff develop some questions that went into the request for proposal to banking institutions. And then I was also asked to help serve on the selection committee for that. I think this was a really great collaborative effort where we as a committee was able to work with staff and add some value in their processes. And I think, certainly I think from a commission standpoint, we were very happy the way that went, and I hope you do too. And I think this was an area, everything I've heard from staff based on some of the conferences they've been on, this is another example of where the city is really kind of pushing the envelope on some of this thing and really setting a precedent and getting a lot of inquiries from other cities on what'd you do and how'd you do that. So I think, Eugene, which is kind of a mid-sized city, is setting, example to a lot of other cities. So I think we have a lot to be proud of in that area. On the Climate Action Plan, we've been very engaged with that. And we, again, working with staff to develop a community outreach plan with various organizations as well as neighborhood associations. And then as Chelsea mentioned, we've been taking a keen interest in trying to build capacity. We're all volunteers. Some of us are retired. Some of us have, full-time jobs and families. So what we want to try to do is be as effective as we can with our time and also try to establish some processes to help us not only prioritize what we're working on, but figure out in a very efficient way so that we can work through some of those issues and provide recommendations to you as a trusted advisor. And I think this is starting to get a little bit of attention. I recently met with the chair of the Housing Review Board, and they're kind of interested in adopting some of our processes to help them in their work. So it's all good. So this year, for fiscal year 2019, the commission had a couple of meetings where we went through and tried to figure out what we want to do in this coming year. And then we also, of course, met with the mayor and the city manager to try to figure out what your priorities are and somehow try to align those. So one of the things that we want to do, kind of building on our working agreement, is to try to figure out how better to engage with you and how we can be effective and, again, serve as your trusted advisor. So we're going to be working on that, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from various commissioners and some one-on-one meetings to try to help us figure out how we can do a better job for you, because we all want to make sure that our time is valuable and that we're providing, the assistance that you need. So for this year, one of the things that we'll be working on, as I mentioned, was the Climate Action Plan update, outreach and policy input. Waste reduction policy, we've sent a request to for you to have a work session on the possibility of banning polystyrenes from food packaging, something that Portland and even the small town of Florence has enacted. And we think the timing is right for this for various reasons. We're very interested in a transportation system plan implementation. Recently reached out to city staff to help engage with that development of those plans, which will be coming to you, I think, as a draft in January. So pretty short time frame on that. Biophilic design, something I'm not familiar with, but something we're going to explore. Neighborhood preparedness is another issue that we're particularly interested in. And I'm sure there's going to be increased attention to that, especially in light of the horrible disaster in Northern California as well as in the LA area. So those of us that live in heavily forested areas of Eugene, Councilor Pryor and I and others, we're kind of look at the scenes on that and kind of worry a little bit about that. On natural gas, we had you had a work session on that. And this evening, we gave to you a refined proposal on some of the recommendations. Those come as a result of requests from you, Mayor, and City Manager recently with our Chair and Vice Chair. So we've kind of refined recommendations which we think are possible and a high priority for us. We also want to follow up this year with some of the proposals that we've sent to you, especially on the home energy scoring system, a similar program that's in Portland. This is very high priority, as well as the tiny homes, the riverfront property, the Northwest Natural Gas Franchise Agreement. We sent a resolution regarding our Children's Trust that we hope that you'll take a look at, as well as the Wildlife Feeding Ordinance. The Commission's also very interested in Envision Eugene as it now transitions to looking at the growth monitoring plan and the urban reserve. I was appointed by the commission to serve on the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee, and last meeting I was also selected as co-chair. So we've met 3 or 4 times now, and we're drinking from the fire hydrant right now, as Councilor Ye knows, getting up to speed on the urban growth model. So a lot of work there, but anyway, it's a very interesting committee, and a lot of important work that will need to be done. We also are interested in following the whole housing issue from our sustainability perspective, and we'll be engaged in that. So that's kind of our work plan for this year. There's obviously going to be, as there always is, some emerging issues and things that we don't know about yet that will be coming to us. Maybe members of the public that attend our commission meetings will alert us to some things that we should be taking action on. But anyway, we'll be looking at those. So that's kind of a summary of what we've done and what we're looking to do this coming year. So I'd be happy to try to answer your questions if you have any.
Great. I just want to start out by saying how awed I am by the work that the Sustainability Commission does. It was a very impressive list when I looked back over the list of all the things you'd worked on in the past year and had moved those things forward significantly. And as we look going forward, I'm struck by you want to improve your engagement with council, but I'm thinking, okay, well, you're doing a pretty good job as it is. So it'll be interesting to see where those conversations lead you in terms of how do councilors feel you could be even more connected and more effective. But very, very impressed by your work, and thank you for this report, because I think it's very, very clear. So, Chris, anybody else want to be in the queue?
Yeah, thank you. Really great report. I appreciate all the work you did last year, and I'm impressed with the work you're proposing to do this year. And I couldn't agree more with the desire to be as good and as trusted a partner. You study the issues that I don't necessarily have the time to study, so we really depend on these boards and commissions to give us that valuable background information. And if we may not have taken up every single thing you proposed last year, we certainly heard about it, and I look at the list and I see a number of things we took up that were recommendations from the Sustainability Commission. So I would say in terms of a batting average, we're doing pretty good, so I appreciate that. As I look through the list of things for 2019, I am impressed with all of them. Interesting one, though, biophilic design. Explain how you would incorporate that. How does that work?
Well, I can't answer that. Commissioner Price on our commission had brought that forward, and I think it's something that's of particular interest to him. And so he is charged with trying to educate the rest of us on the commission and see how that will fit into some of our work plan and maybe not just a one-year thing, but maybe a multi-year effort to see how that could be incorporated into some policy recommendations.
Yeah. I'm intrigued with new ideas, new concepts, so I'll be curious to see what this is and how it would be incorporated into the larger conversation about housing.
I think everyone on the commission is interested in it too. So.
Great, thank you.
So we'll see.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your report very much and for the hard work. You mentioned just a moment ago that the mayor and the manager asked you to come back with, or to do some work as a commission and to come back with a report. Remind me on the topic again.
Yes. A couple of months ago, as is usual practice, before we do our work plan, the chair and vice chair meet with the mayor and the city manager just to kind of go over what might be on the council's agenda, as well as what the city manager thinks might be issues that will probably come up. So, we do that to try to align our work with the council's work. And during that conversation, the issue of the franchise agreement with the Northwest Natural, which, as you know, is up for renewal next October. And so during those conversations, the mayor and city manager suggested that we come up with recommendations on what we'd like to see in the franchise agreement. So that's what we've done. And as you know, as a result of the work session, city attorney's office is looking at what can and can't be done in a franchise agreement.
Right,
You know,
right.
we've done some research on that as well, and, you know, we really couldn't find a lot of precedent, certainly in Oregon or in other states. So we're kind of interested to see what authority the city might have in that regard.
Is it the usual practice of the Sustainability Commission to do that sort of work and/or come back with a report by virtue of a request of one counselor, or is it usually just the majority?
No, I think, no, the franchise.
is it both?
No, well,
I'm asking about the decision-making process.
oh, well, at least as far as the Northwest Natural thing, that is something that came from the commission to the council. I would say in my 5.5 years on the commission, I don't recall any instance where the council has asked us to take a look at an issue. So it's usually, we have been the originator
Right.
of policy
So like
recommendations.
the housing issues and transportation issues are commission-generated. You guys think it's a good idea to look into that?
Exactly, like on the TSP, that obviously has a lot of alignment with climate change and, you know, some of the other things that the commission's interested in. So we're assertive in that and, you know, inserted us into the process. And that was another effort that was pretty collaborative with staff and we feel helped improve you know, what was in the TSP.
Awesome. Has it ever been a conversation piece at the Sustainability Commission to weigh in on our city hall process and selection process?
We've discussed it, but not in a formal way. Just
Why
as,
has it not come forward as a recommendation when we have recommendations from you on a number of other building and related topics in our community?
we just haven't taken it up as a commission. You know, if that's something that you or the council would like us to take a look at, I'm sure we
I'd be
would.
willing to bet you I can't muster 5 to do it,
Well,
but I sure wish I could.
I understand, you know, we all have been, a lot of us have been observing what's going on.
Yep.
We can have a sidebar conversation about that.
Thank you, sir.
Any other comments? Emily, go for it.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And as being the Sustainability Commission liaison, I had a heads-up sneak peek. I just want to say that this is an incredibly hard-working commission. I'm really impressed with how many topics they take up, some of which I don't think actually make it all the way to us, but they make a committee, they agree to how many times they'll meet, who's in charge, they just have assignments and they go out and research things. It's really serious work, and it's been amazingly helpful to me to have them do the research on some of these topics besides me, and I think staff brings information too, so it's nice to have it either expanded or confirmed. And I just want to put a lot of gratitude out to the commission because the members are incredibly dedicated at stepping up to work on the different committees and also to bring the ideas. And you know, you guys follow your rules. You're intense. There's no wiggle room for doing something out of order. And it's very impressive, and I thank you.
Right. Any other folks wanting to comment on the report? Well, thank you very much. Really excellent work. We look forward to hearing from you this coming year on your list of identified topics. So thank you so much for the hard work, and thanks to the whole commission. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And also just like to, shout out to Chelsea and the other city staff. They've been very supportive. And so anyway, I appreciate the support. And I'd say this last year, we've been very appreciative of the council moving forward with some of our recommendations. Because sometimes it can be somewhat frustrating, you think that what the work that you've generated just goes into a black hole. So it's been gratifying. And, anyway, I think everybody's been appreciative of the work you've done. And so I guess with that, I'd also like to just I hope everybody has a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And there's a lot of work to be done, and we look forward to the challenge.
Thank you so much.
I think we need a motion to approve the work
Oh.
plan.
Thank you. Can I have a motion?
I move to approve the FY19 Sustainability Commission Work Plan.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay, and now we are ready for item number 2, an update on the River Road Santa Clara Neighborhood Plan.
As soon as Eric and his team are ready, he kind of take us through the presentation.
Oh, I've got it in mine. It's the same thing, correct? No. Oh, no, it's different. Okay. Slides, gotcha.
Well, thanks for having us again tonight. My name is Eric Brown, Associate Planner in the Planning Division. I'm joined tonight by Louisa DeHeer on my far right, who represents the River Road Community Organization on our Community Advisory Committee, as well as Kate Purley, who is the co-chair for the Community Advisory Committee representing Santa Clara. Previously, you would have received updates from Zach Galloway, who is the project manager for this project up until late summer. He left the city at the end of August, and I've stepped into the role as project manager. So today, we are going to provide you with an update on how neighborhood planning is going in the River Road and Santa Clara neighborhoods. We made a commitment early on in this project to come to you with project updates on a regular basis, particularly when we got to critical junctures in the project. So we have come a long ways since March of this year, when we were last at council with an update on appointing our new CAC co-chairs, well, the CAC and then the co-chairs at that time. We've done a lot of work over the past 6 months, and we wanted to make sure that we kept you in the loop. So that is the purpose of today's work session. We're going to provide a brief overview of the project, how it got started, and what we are doing, particularly with regards to the 3 project phases that we have been engaged in since we were here in March of this year. So we'll talk about the visioning that we've been doing, as well as setting some priorities for the neighborhoods, as well as developing policies. It's important to remember that the work that we're doing now is really built on the work that Script and Scroll, so the early planning work that was done in the 2 neighborhoods to reach out to neighbors, find out what their priorities were, what were the issues that they were grappling with. And these community organizations, River Road and Santa Clara, worked really hard to hear from a diversity of people and build up their capacity to engage in this planning process. And they worked for over 7 years before the city joined the table in earnest with resources to manage the project. Not only are we partnered very closely with the 2 community organizations, we're also partnering with Lane County. And Jared Boder from the county is in the audience today and happy to answer questions if you have questions. But this is a collaborative effort, and we're trying to work in lockstep with the 2 community organizations. To that end, neighbors are engaged at every level of the project management structure. The public involvement model that we're using has a project management team that not only has staff from both the city and the county, as well as our public involvement consultant on the project management team. We also have our co-chairs from the Community Advisory Committee on that project management team. And so they're able to course correct as we're making decisions and ensure that everything that comes out of this planning process is founded on neighborhood involvement, and neighbors have an opportunity to steer the project from the get-go. So at the core is this project management team. If you go a circle out, you've got the Community Advisory Committee. So the Community Advisory Committee is 13 residents of the, or 12 residents of the neighborhood plus one business owner in the neighborhood. But they were appointed by the community organizations and then they were nominated by the community organizations and appointed by the Planning Commission. And so they represent neighborhood interests, and they're involved in writing policies, facilitating workshops, giving us direction on how to engage the public. Really, every decision that the project is making, that the project team is making, is informed by involvement from the Community Advisory Committee. And then a level out from that is the working groups. These are, again, residents of the neighborhoods who have said that they want to be involved in the process, but they maybe didn't want to make that full commitment to the Community Advisory Committee. Working groups are organized around the 5 topic areas. So we have transportation, land use, parks and natural resources, community, and transportation as our 5 topic areas. And the working group members can come and go as they please. So they could show up to our meeting in October, whether or not they were there in September and August, and they can decide not to come again in December if they were able to provide their input and then want to disengage or catch up with us at a later point. So they're meant to be flexible so that folks can come and go as they please and participate in a way that works for them. And then, in addition to these sort of inner circles of public involvement, we have the broader community, and we go to them when we're facing a big decision or when we've come to the conclusion of an important phase of the project. So we've had 2 of those instances so far in this 12-month process, and we're coming up on another one at the end of January. So we want to make sure that we're touching base with the broader community. And it should be said that we've had an amazing participation in these events. Our first event, the kickoff, just over a year ago, saw 400 people in the North Eugene High School gymnasium. Most recently, we decided to split into 2 for the June event, not only to provide folks with different opportunities to engage. We had an weekday evening meeting as well as a weekend afternoon meeting. So it gave people a more diverse range of people the opportunity to engage, but it also made it more manageable for our facilitators and for just logistics of the meeting. And there we saw 350 show up to the 2 meetings. So we're still getting a lot of participation. People care deeply about these neighborhoods, and I think that is testament to the work that the Script and Scroll groups did early on to reach out to neighbors and get them involved in this process. A brief overview of the different project phases. Reaching out began in October. This was when we were doing our broadest outreach to the community and engaging people at the highest level around their hopes for the neighborhood, the opportunities that they saw in the neighborhood, and also the issues that they were encountering on a day-to-day. We asked them what they value and what they hoped for in the future. From that work, from that broad outreach, we started to develop vision statements. And so we were just embarking on that work back in March when we were here. And so that's the neighborhood visioning phase that continued into the summer. And it overlaps a little bit with the neighborhood priorities phase, which is what Kate is going to tell us about here in a second, where we asked folks to weigh in on important issues in the community that emerged from that reaching out phase. From neighborhood priorities, we moved into policy development, which is what we're doing now, and we have ongoing meetings to work on policies. Later in the new year, we'll move into action planning, which a lot of folks are looking forward to. They want to talk about the things that we're going to do, the things that we're going to create to implement their vision. And finally, we'll move into an adoption phase that you all will be intimately involved in. Tonight, we're going to focus on visioning, neighborhood priorities, and policy development. And with that, I will turn it over. Oh no, I'm going to keep going on neighborhood visioning and just say that during this process, we took all of that data that we collected back in the fall of 2017, and we looked at what were the important issues that folks were saying that they valued in their neighborhood or the opportunities that they saw in their neighborhood. And we developed 5 topic area vision statements, which are included in the packet you received for tonight's meeting, as well as 19 neighborhood goals. So the goals are organized under the topic areas, and they approximate to the big ideas that are contained in the neighborhood vision.
No, they're in the handout that we got in our packet.
Yeah, they should be included in the packet you received for the meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate to talk about neighborhood priorities.
So in the last 12-plus years of work in our community organizations, we've realized that we have a lot of agreement in our community about some issues and priorities, and that there are those what we call stickier issues where we find it difficult to find common ground. And so at our June outreach community event, we wanted to get people together to talk about the issues where we don't have a community consensus, where we have divergent opinions, and wanted them to have those conversations. So we, as Eric was saying, we split our event into 2 possible times, one weekend evening and weekday evening and one weekend afternoon, both at North Eugene High School. And we had over 300 residents attend. What we did was take those 5 topic areas that our plan is divided into and identified one issue in each of those 5 topic areas to address at this meeting, because the meeting's only 2 hours long and we needed to give every topic area fair play in the amount of time provided. So we picked what we thought were sticky issues and sat people down. They came in, they had something to eat, they did a little bit of mingling with their neighbors and sat where they were comfortable. And we gave them an introduction into the work we were going to do that evening. And then we asked them to get up, and they had been assigned a number on their name tag, and they were forced to shuffle their seating. So now they were seated with people that they don't know and that they don't necessarily share values with to start having these conversations. All of these tables at the event were facilitated by CAC members or our resident volunteers. And each question that was asked of the neighbors, they were given the opportunity to read the question and record their preferences, what their desired outcomes or best solutions would be. And then we would proceed with a lively debate of the question around the table, and then go back to them and say, well, now that you've heard from your neighbors and you understand what their challenges or experiences are, do you maybe have a different opinion about how we might come to an agreement about a future course of action? And that was a really informative format for our neighbors to really be able to, if you had a table that was primarily elderly folks who don't experience the need for sidewalks near schools, and you have a young mother in the same table, then all of a sudden they're sharing experiences that they wouldn't otherwise have themselves. And that led to some really great and informative position changes amongst people, which we found really heartening. So we realized at the end of this event that basically one size isn't going to fit all in terms of our problem solving in our neighborhood, but that with some tailoring for every one of these options, we can meet the vast majority of the needs of our community members. And they're willing to do that work, and they're willing to try to come to that form of consensus. So this is an example of one of the questions. So one of the topic areas is economic development. And we asked residents in the scenario to the left, labeled A, the picture is designed to show you that people live in the neighborhood, but perhaps shop and work outside the neighborhood. In option B, you live in the neighborhood and you shop in your neighborhood, but you work somewhere outside of your neighborhood. And in option C, you work, you shop, you live, and you socialize within your neighborhood boundaries. And so we asked them to consider what that might be like for them, what they thought their vision for the future of our neighborhood could be, and what they would be most happy with. And asked them also to consider that this would create different patterns of development on the ground and complexity of competing uses if they chose not to have a purely residential focused community. And our neighbors were overwhelmingly in support of a live, work, socialize, play in your neighborhood outcome. And this is an example of some of the analysis that went on with the data that came out of these workshops. And I would encourage you at some point to go to the website and look at these, because they're not only broken out by a vast majority of people at the forum, we also spent a lot of time doing other forms of outreach. And so the results are broken out by Santa Clara residents, by River Road residents, by low-income residents, by youth, by people, communities of color, by low-income residents, and all the different choices and the spectrum of their choices is reflected. And we chose this one tonight for brevity because across all those different categories, at least 50% of residents in all those categories chose that same option in terms of economic development for our neighborhood. So this is a slide to show you that when I talk about outreach to diverse communities, we took that charge very seriously. We realized that many people can't or won't come to the kind of community forums that we're hosting at the high school. And so we decided to mount a vigorous campaign to take those same questions to them, where they live, where they work. And we realized it's a different format for them. Although the questions are the same, they don't get to experience that small table discussion with people of different experiences than themselves. But their feedback can still be substantive to the planning process. So planning staff, resident volunteers, and Cogito, the outreach consultants that were hired to help us, went around and we visited with the youth community, communities of color, people with disabilities, and our low-income residents. And we did that through lots of different venues. So we held a picnic in the park for families with young children. We went to a summer practice of the North Eugene football team and bent their ear for an hour doing this process so we could hear what the youth had to say. We intercepted families for an entire day at the Ross Lane Low-Income Housing Project off of Hunsaker. We hosted a barbecue for first-time home buyers in the Lower River Road area. We spent an afternoon with the Lane Independent Living Alliance residents and had them identify specifically on maps the challenges they face to getting around in our community and other barriers to their full participation. And we had sit-downs with the Huerta de la Familia organization here in town, which also rents the vast majority of the community garden plots in Santa Clara. So after we did all that, we also posted our questions and surveys online and then had neighbor volunteers go door to door and ask residents to please, you missed the in-person event, but we'd love for you to go in the comfort of your own home and take this survey online and let us know how you feel about change in the neighborhood, what you think the direction could be. And we had another 106 people participate that way. And the small group, what we call small group outreach, diversity outreach that I mentioned before, netted us another 146 people as well, providing us with feedback. So we're well over our 500 mark there for what we were trying to reach, closer to 600. And I would say that we are 34,000 residents in our two neighborhoods. So we didn't provide exhaustive outreach, but we were exhausted providing the outreach that we did provide. So I will pass this along to Louisa and go from there.
So I'll talk about what we're doing right now. As we've mentioned, our process is really unique for many reasons. We're neighborhood-led and community-driven. We're in active and positive collaboration with the city and the county, and we are, as community members, writing the policies that will achieve the directions we've set for ourselves. So this is new ground on lots of fronts. So beginning in August, we began to gather with our working groups to focus specifically on each of those 19 goals that we had developed from our vision statements. CAC members in this example meeting went and stood next to a goal that we had written, and they were posted on the wall, and asked our neighbors to come around and learn about those focus areas and sign up for 1, 2, 3, or even more of those goals to work on. And then CAC goal members or goalkeepers went and met with individually with those team members, people who are passionate about land use or protecting the beauty of our river next to River Road and the actual Willamette River, and get together in living rooms or cafes or online or however they wanted to try coming up with ideas around how these policies could actually work and what would we need to learn, what do we not know enough about in order to start drafting these policies, what are the questions we need to ask, and who do we need to ask them of. So we also have technical advisory committee members, those are city staff, people from EWEB, LTD, anybody who's going to touch these areas that we're working on, and we have direct communication with those people, asking them the questions about what are your focus areas, what's in your plans, how do we partner these things all together. So the CAC connect with those folks directly, and we've asked those point people in the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, and mined the extensive data from all of that visioning and reaching out phases that we've just talked about. So in 8 weeks, we came up with lots of good ideas for policies as well as for specific actions, ideas that people are really passionate about to implement those ideas. Writing a collective plan that works across our 2 neighborhoods, with such complex services and providers, is challenging. However, we really feel that by starting from that collective vision and by staying very connected to all of our different entities and to our neighborhood passions, that we will end up with a strong, really forward-thinking plan that has really broad support. So that's where we're holding our focus. This is an example of one of our draft policies. It is slow and it's messy. It's hard to determine exactly what is a policy and what is an action. It's hard to sometimes think broadly or think a level up when someone comes in who really wants to participate but is super focused on traffic calming on their street. So how do we pull that back a little bit and think about that as a broader policy with that as an opportunity for an action? For example, some of us are big picture, some of us are detail-oriented. We're all just neighbors. We're not experts in these fields, but we're working together slowly and iteratively to figure this all out. We also, as Eric mentioned, want people to be able to participate at any level whenever they can. So having time at every meeting for people to jump in and out, get caught up, share with us what their particular passions are around their neighborhood and what they want to see happen. So tomorrow is the 4th of 5th open meetings with the CAC and representatives from the Technical Advisory Committee. The CAC is course correcting at every step. So we realized that we needed to have concerted time where we're looking just at each individual topic area. So we've spent, it'll be 10 hours in total of committee time to look at the policies that we've directed under each action area and figure out where there's cross-reference opportunity with a different goal or option action area, where there's gaps in our knowledge, where there's gaps in the policies from all the data that we've gathered. So we're having those active collaborative discussions with our community members, with the CAC, and we'll be finishing that process up by the end of November. We want to come up with that clear direction at the end of this policy, but this is not a clearly directed process. It's very slowly thinking about how we can keep broad engagement and make the policies supportable. So we've course corrected, we've heard feedback at every stage to make sure we have all the relevant information. Our next step will be to gather all together and take yet another look at our draft policies with our community members, with our working groups, and with staff. And I'll turn it back to Eric to tell you about that next step.
Thanks, Louisa. So our next event, after we wrap up these topic area focused working groups or work sessions with the CAC, will be a policy roundup in early December. So December 5th, you're all invited to North Eugene High School from 6 till 8 p.m. I've already heard from a planning commissioner. Our liaison on the planning commission is going to be there. It's going to be a chance for project staff, community advisory committee members, technical advisory committee members, and working group members to all get together in one room and look at all of the policies that were developed under the goals. And so it's an opportunity to see that broad swath of goals and policies, and take a triple bottom line approach to looking at how they mutually support each other, what the themes are, and look at it from those 3 angles. So we're looking forward to that moment when we have at least a first iteration of our final draft policies. Sorry?
Sorry, I'll wait till my.
Oh. Our next step, so once we wrap up the policy development phase, at the end of that, we're going to have a big community event again, where we take that circle out a little bit further. We'll invite all 34,000 residents by mail to North Eugene High School. They're all welcome. We'll make it work if you all come. So we're looking forward to that. We also want to come back to council at that point to make sure that we get direction from you, that we're on the right track with our policies before we start down the path too far of developing actions around them. When we start getting into code writing and identifying city, county, community resources to direct towards certain activities, we want to make sure that those are in support of policies that you all support. So we'll be coming back in the new year to get that direction. From policy development, we move into action planning, and we start to identify those things that we're going to do and create to implement the policies and achieve our vision, and then we begin that adoption process, as I said earlier. As part of the action planning process, we also have this fairly large grant from the Federal Transit Administration. It's a $450,000 grant that allows us to do a focus study of the River Road corridor, where we are likely to see some sort of increased transit service. And so we want to know what are the impacts on housing affordability along the corridor associated with increased transit. What's the impact of on redevelopment opportunities and the financial feasibility of mixed use and multifamily along the corridor with that transit service. In addition, the lead consultant, Sarah Architect, is going to be able to develop code and station area designs for the River Road corridor, and using a hybrid form-based code, be able to direct us on how the station areas should develop. And all of this helps us implement the community vision. So the CAC will be intimately involved with that FTA grant work. There will be additional workshops associated with it. So it's moving in lockstep with the neighborhood plan and with the public involvement plan. And with that, I'll turn it over to you all for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much. I have a couple of counselors in the queue, but I just wanted to thank you for this work. I loved reading this study, and I loved the data that you collected, and I loved the way it was presented because it was so interesting and so clear. So really, really wonderful work, and I'm just eager to hear the conversation from counselors. So I have Mike and Claire in the queue, and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. Been around a while, and I'm quite certain there's no other neighborhood associations in our city who have done more to define the character of the expectations of their neighborhood than River Road and Santa Clara communities have done. Nobody's done more work than you guys. You've been on it for years, especially Kate, since way before I was ever here. So I admire that quite a bit. I've always liked to consider myself a defender of neighborhood livability. Terry, we're probably going to need you up here with a couple of my questions, I bet. Number one, so let's, and I'm serious, with what you're doing, how is that going to integrate well with what we're doing right now to clean up clear and objective standards? In other words, if we're getting more specific and in some ways restrictive, how are we going to integrate that with clear and objective standards?
Good question. I think I'd want to prepare a more complete answer to you, but off the top of my head.
Start, because we'll get to it later, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, this plan is in a stage where we're still developing the vision and the policies. And the code that will be developed for the corridor specifically will be designed for the plan that it's going to implement. The Clear and Objective project is working on citywide code. And so they certainly have to be compatible and not conflict with one another.
That's what I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
Your integrated idea of how does making sure the rules are the same for everybody everywhere interact with, we're going to be special over here. Forgive me for, I don't know if I said
No, it's a good comment.
How do you I want to know how you approach that in your head in developing this stuff.
Well, one thing I'm hoping that we learn from the River Road Transit study, the corridor study, is what kind of code we can expect to apply that is supportive of the development that we envision along our corridors. So this is the first corridor, River Road, that we're able to direct so many resources to really study what the effects of redevelopment are going to be along it. And so as we were writing the grant application, we were having in mind the other corridors within Eugene and hoping that we could apply some consistent lessons from the work that's developed here to other corridors over time, if that makes sense.
A little bit, but I'm going to get a little more in the weeds here. The vision statement on the land use section of this reads as follows. Land use in River Road in Santa Clara supports neighborhood character and local identity, including our longstanding agricultural heritage and high-value soils, which I know I grow every vegetable you can think of, and I know is critically important to people who live there. What percentage, because you are the person who would know, what percentage of the city's buildable land inventory resides in River Road in Santa Clara?
I don't know that off the
Oh,
top of
come
my
on.
head. I'm
A
sorry
guess,
to
a
disappoint.
wild guess. Is it more than 50%? Is it less than 50%?
I don't think it's more than 50%, but we can definitely do that calculation.
This is an important thing that I bet you could make a pretty good guess at. And the reason is because we're talking here about focusing on what their choices are about focusing predominant areas of development around the corridor of River Road, and that's awesome. And it sounds like they want to protect soils, and that's awesome too. But we've already decided that a bunch of land there is developable for housing. So I want to see the council make up its mind. Is it going to be developable for housing or is it going to be protected? When we get to this point, we're going to have to make that call. And if it's going to be protected, that's awesome from my perspective. But we're taking that out of the buildable lands inventory. So I want to know what percentage of our buildable lands inventory exists there and how much are we talking about? And please, when this comes back to this table, be prepared to answer that in specifics, please, because we're going to have to talk about this. And my questions on it aren't going away. I have more. Can I have a second round, please, Mayor?
Okay, Claire?
Thank you. Well, I do not have bunches of questions. I have heaps of praise. So I just am so grateful and impressed and not surprised, given the track history of Script and Scroll, with the work that you have done. And I really appreciate you detailing for this council the steps that you've taken and the checking in that you've done and, giving us kind of, I think, a really clear picture of the scope of the work so that when these items do come back to council, we will have an understanding that these are very well grounded in what residents in these two neighborhoods have requested and the direction that you think this should go that informs the decisions that we then make. And we will need to grapple with, other policy decisions we might have that may appear to be in conflict, but I don't think so necessarily, because I don't think that particular item is saying that nobody else can build a house in River Road or Santa Clara, but that folks have the opportunity to grow their own food and to find ways for the neighborhood to be resilient going into the future. And so, there's some ways, I think, subtle ways to think about the things that you are telling us that we may not take so subtly. So we'll look to you to make sure that we're interpreting them correctly. And so, I just think the work you've done is very impressive, both in the depth and the breadth of the topics that you have brought forward from the community, and then the way you've helped residents grapple in a constructive way with those places that we might not be in automatic agreement, and really helped us think those things through. So I really appreciate that, and I will make every effort to attend your policy roundup on December 5th, because I think that will be a very informative discussion that I'd like to be a part of.
Alan?
When you guys were done with your presentation, I turned to Claire and said, wow. And then she muttered something about her ward rocks, but that's remains to be seen. you guys I really appreciate coming back to us and talking about this process. And I continually am impressed with the work that you've done and the amount of outreach you do. I bet you're exhausted. It's actually a little mind-boggling how many people have participated in this process, even though there's so many people there. You've really set the bar really high, and in the process of doing that, really screwed over every other neighborhood in the city by setting this bar so high that they can't measure up to this process and what you've done. I think you're on the right track with your vision statements and goals. I like the 5 basic areas. They seem to encompass everything, and then all the goals that you've got. I read through them. They all seem broad enough to drive a truck through, but specific enough to get some meat underneath the bones, and that latter part is really what this is going to be about, and then making this a document that has some staying power and also legal staying power. And so kudos to all of you for the work that you've done, and how lucky for you to inherit this project. Holy cow. Yeah, just keep it going.
Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, you grabbed the words out of my mouth with wow. I think it's tremendous. I was very interested in the research you've done, and I'm very interested in how you've taken that research and begun to employ it and incorporate it. And one of the reasons I was so supportive of moving River Road Santa Clara to the front of the line in terms of modeling this exact kind of process was because I really had faith that you could do it. And yeah, the bar is high because I believed that you would come at it with the right attitude and the right approach. And I think what impresses me a lot about what you've been doing is there is a very high level of trust between the different players. And I think with that level of trust between the different players, you can actually sit down and work together, not just as a committee or as a group, but actually with the people in the neighborhoods. And I think the model that we want to create that will then be usable in the other neighborhoods, because this is the model we're going to be using, is that if you come into it with the kind of authoritative, I know what I'm talking about kind of approach. You do the research, you do the information gathering, you have knowledge about the situation, and then you're just trusting and authentic about the way you do it. Nobody's trying to grab power. Nobody's trying to dominate over someone else. You're all working collaboratively together in a trusting environment. And then you will be accountable for this work when it's done. And I think that's an important piece as well. You don't just bring this report and drop it on our lap and say, we're done, we're walking away. You'll continue to still be there as a partner. And I think that's critical for us. And I think all of those elements together, when this is delivered, will become the model that we will then take out to the other neighborhoods. And for me, I'm incredibly impressed with the work you're doing today. And I'm incredibly hopeful and enthusiastic about what this work will represent for the future, because we will then take this and use it in other areas. And Mike is absolutely right. This is a huge whack-a-mole issue. It's been a whack-a-mole issue for 30 years. If you want this and you want this, they don't necessarily remain compatible. But I'm confident that as we work through this, we'll start looking with the eyes that say, if I whack this mole down, does it necessarily have to pop up over here? Or is there some outside the box way we can approach it? And I really want your help in figuring out a way to not just keep whacking one mole down to have it pop up somewhere else. Help us figure out how we can deal with these seemingly contradictory issues. And I'm thinking that if we can figure out how to be if then, that might be a good algorithm to kind of approach this with, in whatever the situation is. If this happens, then we can do that, and try to sort through all the different possibilities of what that, and I'm confident you can do it. So let me finish by saying I really appreciate the trust you have among yourselves, and I will add my trust to you. I believe you will do a great job, and I trust you to do it. Thank you.
Mike, you want a second round?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate what you said, Chris. Thank you. And please understand, my intense questions are because I agree with Claire. You guys have worked a long, hard time on this. And I've been around it for an awful lot of years, with Santa Clara more specifically than River Road. And the things that I hear at neighborhood meetings are more than anything else, the word protect, which is normal and natural and awesome, I think. But protecting land from development naturally comes into conflict with an awful lot of things we do at this table. And I want to avoid conflict and see the seamless integration work well. So I foresee some challenges with that I want to head off by asking staff the right questions and making sure that they're prepared to see these intersections coming. They're obviously very bright and they've done this. But I need some answers too before we get too far down that road to understand how they're being integrated. So, for example, I guess I would ask, how are you integrating city code and city policy questions around this with what will be the policy recommendations that the county receives versus the city, and how will that enforcement mechanism actually work in the checkerboard? Can you address that?
Sure. I mean, we are approaching it as one plan adopted by two different governments, and a large part of Santa Clara is outside the urban growth boundary. And so it is a necessary partnership to have the county involved in the adoption of the plan. They implement land use outside the urban growth boundary. And so that's very important. And inside the urban growth boundary, as you all probably know, we have an IGA with the county. And so the city of Eugene implements land use regulations inside the urban growth boundary. And we coordinate all the time. Jared and his team make their own decisions, but we are in coordination with them under the IGA and on a day-to-day basis. For instance, with the issue of accessory dwelling units, the county passed their own ordinance that applies to land outside of the city limits. So there are differences and challenges with this reality. But I think since the beginning of the plan, we've approached it as what it is, which is one part of the community. No matter if you live in or out, there should be a common vision that we then work to implement down the road with the tools that make that the most efficient way possible.
You're comfortable with all the 190s and all the interactions between us?
I'm comfortable, yes.
Okay. For me, the inability to have a conversation about an awful lot of the protected soils that we want to keep in that area. How are you going to approach that with regard to, let's say, because we don't have a number, let's just say, and I'm going to use a wild number here, that 25% of the city's buildable land inventory is composed of neighborhood-level land in River Road and Santa Clara. They've said already they want to focus on the corridor. How will you approach that if they want to say that's protected land? And I bring this up because I've been a part of an awful lot of conversations. So I just want to understand better how we're approaching that.
So I would say that our neighbors don't see protection of prime agricultural soil and accommodating density as mutually exclusive principles.
Awesome.
And we took the question of how do we want to accommodate density to that particular form. In June, that was the sticky land use question. And they had options. And option one was evenly dispersed everywhere throughout the neighborhood, ADUs, maybe duplexes, a broad smattering of where we accommodate density. Option two was exclusively along River Road. Do we want to just concentrate medium and high density along River Road to accommodate density? Or option number three was, do we want to expand the different types of units that could be built and instead accommodate density along collectors and arterials, and some in the neighborhood, some along River Road, and some along these other more used streets with maybe there's like a limit of 2 stories or 2.5 stories, and maybe there's fourplexes, maybe there's townhouses, maybe there's a lot more cottage building with some form of green space protection to accommodate density and land that's not just for farmland, but also for stormwater protection, because that's a big issue in our neighborhood. We don't have the pipe system that runs everywhere like other neighborhoods have. We require land to infiltrate water and open waterways to carry stormwater through our neighborhood into the river. And so we are looking at all those options, and we are weighing the possible outcomes, and we still, after all that, know that 20 or 30 years down the road, no matter how many residents we have as a metropolitan area, we all need to eat and a number of times a day. And so we are taking care of those things in the best way we know how. And it's not getting left behind. Nobody's pretending that we don't have buildable lands. Nobody's pretending that we don't have the best soil in the nation. We're looking at those in conjunction and trying to meet everybody's needs to the best of our ability, and doing that with both the city and the county at the same time. And I just wanted to mention, Councilor Pryor, you specifically said, is it okay if I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
You kidding? You've been around
I'm
forever.
driving.
I'll ask the rest of my stuff later. That's all right.
You talked about a if-then thing. So I think the way we're looking at it is we know we're not planners, but we believe our neighbors are absolute experts in how their neighborhood works, and that to come up with out-of-the-box solutions, you need people who weren't trained to think inside the box, and those are the neighbors. That's the way we're looking at problem solving. And you say an if-then, we say not no because, but yes if. So if there's a way to get there, we want to reach out to our technical advisory committee people, our working group people, other people in our community, and find out what are all the possible options and how can we get there. Cool. And that's really how we're approaching every one of the problems we're coming to at this point.
Thank you for that, Kate. The thing I would say is that I've been around enough to know that the neighborhood has done so much work for so long that they have parcel-specific information on every swale, every piece of property in the joint. So when we get to the discussion around buildable lands inventory and what's currently in and what the recommendations are, I'm assuming we're going to be able to have that conversation at the fraction of an acre level because we're going to know on a parcel-specific basis, right?
Yes, if.
Well done.
The buildable lands inventory is citywide, and there were assumptions made by plan designation. It's not parcel-specific information as adopted under Envision Eugene. But the one point I would add to Kate's excellent explanation of how this is really working is that to adopt a new plan and any code that implements it, we have to make findings that it complies with our comprehensive plan and our residential land inventory. So we will bring that information to you in our analysis of what the impacts are.
Assume this is all done with an eye towards potential Measure 49 stuff, too?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say, you guys aren't making other neighborhoods look bad. You're highlighting what is possible all over this city. When we have properly motivated and supported folks willing to put in what I can only imagine is uncountable numbers of hours of volunteer time. So I just wanted to thank you for what you guys are doing, and you're just going to create a wonderful model that can be used all over the city. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. I just want to say we should all be grateful to you for protecting agricultural land. As you pointed out, we all have to eat, and it's really important to have food nearby for climate control, and as well as for freshness and goodness and all those things, but that may be more important than anything you're talking about. And on another topic, I wonder if you've talked about annexation of all those places.
I'll take that. So all along, we've decided that our plan is annexation neutral, that the future's coming, whether you're an incorporated resident or an unincorporated resident. And together, we need to move forward and create a plan for how our neighborhood is going to grow and develop, our two neighborhoods. And that's the important part of our work, the most important part of our work, is setting a course and creating the structure to support that vision that we've created collaboratively. We do understand that governance in some respects is going to change over that period of time. We've gone out to our neighbors and all along have told them this is an annexation neutral plan. Annexation is a tool to achieve some goals or outcomes. If you want city fire or city police service, that comes through annexation. That isn't the only option to achieving fire and police protection in our neighborhood. And so we are treading lightly down the line of governance. And one, you'll notice as you look through the packet, goal number 18 is specifically about public service provision. And part of our work right now is meeting with all the different service districts that provide our services as they exist now. And those are part of our technical advisory committee. Those people are experts in providing the service in our neighborhood at this point. And we are asking them the questions about what kind of support do you need as you exist right now? What do you envision the future might look like for your service district? What are the possible outcomes, the broadest possible spectrum of outcomes? And how can we include support for your vision for that in our planning process? So it's not annexation blind, but it is annexation neutral.
Thank you.
Mike, one more question?
Yeah, I just want to bring it full circle with Terry. So I love what Kate said. Yes, if. I get that entirely. That sounds like people who want to work together. My original question to you, how do you square yes, if? And by the way, who gets to say what if is? Is that embedded in this policy? If that's the policy suggestions, right, that are going to come through for our adoption. So if you didn't do the buildable lands inventory by parcel specific, but by code, how do you square yes, if with clear and objective?
I'll mull that one over. But clear and objective is also a citywide analysis. I'm not sure I'm quite getting the root of your
Talking
question.
about how people decide to develop land. This talks about the idea of having it very specific to this area is a deferred tract that says, hey, under these conditions. And it's, since it's city code, it's city saying, yes, you can develop your property if you'll do it in this way. How do you square that with the state law requires anybody that builds the city to have a clear and objective path for development for everybody equally? I'm saying, how are you approaching the work of merging those two goals?
I would say any code developed for housing in this plan or any other plan will have a clear and objective path.
Okay. Thank you.
I just, anybody else need a round? I wanted to comment on one other aspect of your data, which I really, really appreciated, and it was the breakdown of the low income, the disabled, and the communities of color, because their answers were a little bit different. And I really appreciate the fact that you used an equity lens here and that information is in front of us. And I think, one of the things that struck me at the end was, let's see, what are these bar charts? The questions around, what a community, that it was clear that those low-income people with disabilities and communities of color placed a sort of higher value on the availability of services. It was a little less about park space and much more about, are we getting the government services we need? Or do we have the public safety we need? So I think it was really, really helpful information. And even where they came out on the roads, I always thought about this when I was running for office and I was canvassing every neighborhood in town. And some neighborhoods would complain that they didn't have sidewalks and wanted them, and other neighborhoods would say they have sidewalks they don't want. People just were all over on the sidewalks. And it was also different for your communities of color in terms of how they looked at the sidewalk question, how many sidewalks they wanted. So very, very interesting, and I think very helpful to play that out, because I think we tend to overlook it because it tends to be the kind of dominant culture that answers these surveys, and you really got past that. And so kudos. I think it's a great, great model and very helpful to us. So I want to especially point that out. Very helpful work. Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you. We look forward to hearing about the next chapter. Thank you so much. And we are adjourned.
The roundup.